I am Primal Piggy. Thank you for joining me for another BDSM United podcast. BDSM's old guard roots were once almost entirely homosexual men. Took almost 30 years before the scene became largely inclusive of homosexual women too. And then almost 10 more before opening up to a significant amount of straight people. Today, BDSM is considered pansexual in that it's open to all people. Therefore, it's good for us to understand words that you'll hear used in the LGBTQIA uh, communities. So let's look at part one and some of these words that are LGBTQIA plus. Ally is a word that means a person who is part of a privileged group, oftentimes heterosexual, cisgender, that is a friend, an advocate, or a supporter for LGBTQ people and their rights. An ally usually helps challenge heterosexism, cissexism, and just overall stigma towards people by educating people in their lives. We can all be allies for each other. Androgynous refers to someone's gender expression in terms of the way they look, dress, or act. Being androgynous means drawing on both feminine and masculine forms of expression. For some people, this might be how they want to express themselves daily. For others, it might be only sometimes. Try looking up for some examples Asia Kate Dillon, Boy George, and Jaden Smith for real life examples of famous people who have been described as androgynous. Asexual or aromantic are terms that describe the sexuality of someone who doesn't feel sexual or romantic attraction or may only feel it rarely. Also, they're also called gray asexual, or in some situations, like after developing a strong emotional bond, also called demisexual. Assigned sex means the sex and gender you are given by a doctor when you are born, usually based on the sex characteristics they can see, like your genitals. In a small number of cases, a baby may be born with a visible intersex trait. Attraction is a word that means how emotionally, romantically, physically, or sexually pleasing someone is to you. Attraction can be made up of someone's physical, such as their body type, their skin color, the way they dress, their personal, such as their intelligence or their skills, and cultural and social, things like cultural background or popularity, traits, and qualities. Biphobia is a word that describes any intentional forms of violence, threats, and or hurtful comments, thoughts, or beliefs towards people who identify as bisexual or pansexual. Bisexual. A bisexual person is a person of any gender who has romantic and or sexual relationships with and or is attracted to people from more than one gender. Some people who fit this description prefer terms such as queer or pansexual in recognition of more than two genders, although bi technically refers to two and is often used by people who have relationships with and or attractions for people of more genders than just men or women. Brother boy is a word that describes an Aboriginal or a Torres Strait Islander gender diverse man who was assigned female at birth. Brother boys have a male identity and a distinct cultural identity. Brother boys' cultural, spiritual, and religious beliefs are pivotal to their lives and identities. Cisgender is a word that describes the gender experiences of people whose gender identity is similar to the sex assigned to them at birth. Cisnormativity is a word that describes the assumption that people are cisgender and talk about the world from a cisgender viewpoint. This means there is an expectation that being cisgender is somehow normal. Cisnormative attitudes and beliefs including believing that people's gender identity should always match their assigned sex at birth. Cissexism is a term that means viewing cisgender as the norm and superior to other identities outside of this norm, usually through prejudice and discrimination. Coming out is a term used by a lot of people to describe when they tell others about their sexuality and or gender. This phrase is a shortened version of coming out of the closet, and it's been around for over 30 years. Coming out means different things to different people. For some, it's about coming out to the world. To others, it's about coming out to people like friends or family. Lots of people talk about coming out more than once because as you meet new people, they might not know how you identify. Disclosing is a term some people use to describe letting others know about their gender and or sexuality. People use this term differently depending on the situation and the person they're talking to. For instance, non-binary and trans people might use this term as a way to share their gender identity since they're letting others know their gender is different to the assigned sex. Others might talk about coming out to their friends but disclosing their identity to a doctor. Endosex is a new word that means the opposite of intersex. It means that a person has innate physical sex characteristics that match what is expected for female or male bodies. Innate means that the person is born with these characteristics, including chromosomes, hormones, genitals, and other anatomy. Feminine and femininity is a word used to describe the qualities, behaviors, and roles that girls and women may be expected to take in their community. In Western culture, this can include traits like sensitivity, empathy, and being agreeable, activities like domestic work and childcare, and forms of expression like wearing dresses and showing emotion. Femininity has nothing to do with biology, and it changes depending on the society or cultures that you're raised in. For this reason, men and boys can show feminine traits and behaviors. Gay is a label used to describe people whose emotional, romantic, physical, and sexual attraction is to people of the same gender. Gender binary is a term that describes the common assumption that there are only two genders that people can identify with, either male or female. The gender binary is one of the most difficult to change ideas in society, even though it excludes many people's life experiences and histories. Gender diverse is a term that describes a person who feels that their gender identity doesn't fit the categories associated with their assigned sex. For example, someone raised as a girl may feel as though the categories of female and feminine are restrictive or don't apply to them. Questioning how gender stereotypes affect you is normal, and some people identify as genders other than male or female. Gender dysphoria is a medical term used to describe the distress or discomfort that people may feel when their assigned sex and gender identity don't match. It's common for people feeling gender dysphoria to be uncomfortable with their body, for instance, during puberty, and the roles of their assigned gender. Some people prefer the term body dysphoria instead because it refers specifically to the discomfort being with their body and their reproductive organs. Gender expectation is a term that describes the expectations of others that others have about our assigned sex at birth and how that affects how we're told to behave. For those whose gender identity or expression is different to their assigned sex at birth, it can be more difficult to explore their identity because of these expectations and the misunderstanding and discrimination of others. Gender expression is a term that means the way we show our gender identity to the people around us, usually with the clothing we wear, the hairstyles we adopt, the mannerisms we use, or the activities we do. Gender history is a term that describes the gender experiences someone has with their gender identity over time, which may be different to their assigned sex at birth. It refers to all of their gender experiences as a whole. While some people may choose to reveal their gender history to others, some may choose to reveal only parts of it or none at all. Gender identity is a term that describes our own understanding and experiences of gender, despite what society expects. Our gender can be understood, experienced, and shown through our identity, such as with our labels and pronouns, our body, for example, our appearance, and expression, how we act, how we dress. Gender norm is a term used to describe a range of standards and expectations that apply to a specific gender in a particular society, culture, and or community. These can change throughout time. For example, in Australia, it's common for newborn baby girls to be dressed in pink and boys in blue. However, a long time ago, it was the opposite way around. Heterocis-sexism is a word that describes a form of discrimination that views heterosexuality and cisnormativity as the norm and superior to other gender, sexual, and romantic identities. Heteronormativity is a word that describes the way that people generally assume that others are heterosexual and think about the world from a heterosexual viewpoint or perspective. This means there is an expectation that being straight is somehow normal. Heteronormative attitudes and beliefs include believing that people should always be straight and only date the opposite gender to them. Heterosexism is a word form of discrimination that views heterosexuality as the norm and superior to other sexual and romantic identities. I'm Primal Picky. Thank you for joining me for part one of this look at some of the terms that are applicable and apply to the LGBTQ plus community, and because um, the BDSM community is largely made up of people from all gender identities and sexualities and sexual and gender identities. It's important that we know what these terms mean. Join us in a future podcast for part two, where we define some more terms. You can find all of our resources at www.bdsmunited.com. It was a joy bringing this part one to you, and I look forward to bringing part two to you as well soon.